Hello and welcome to VVork. I'm Brian Watrous and this is part 25 in a 10-part video series where we're exploring how to automate using vRealize Orchestrator. As you can see from the title here, in this particular video and the 5 videos following it, what we're going to be studying is something called configuration elements. So what are configuration elements? To me, configuration elements provide a way of avoiding hard coding values in the attributes in our workflows. We'll find out here shortly why that's useful, but configurations provides a repository, a centralized repository where we can store attribute values. So before we get going, a little bit of terminology here. This is the configurations tab. You might want to memorize its icon. You're going to see that icon coming up in a few videos. So this is the configurations tab. Over here we have numerous folders. Folders like elsewhere here are used to organize our stuff. For instance, you'll notice that I've created my own folder down here, the VVork folder. You are encouraged to create your own folder too, so that you don't mix up your configuration attributes with other people's or VMware's. So those are folders, again, just for organization purposes. But what we have here are called configuration elements. Now, configuration elements are in effect, each one of these is a container that can hold multiple configuration attributes. So the actual values that we're not storing in the configuration element per se, but rather in the configuration attributes, which we see here on the right side of the screenshot. So in this particular example here, the element that we've selected has 4 different configuration attributes. Each has a name, just like an ordinary attribute that you see on the General tab in the workflow. Configuration attributes have a name. For instance, I see hostname, tenant, user, and password. Plus, just like ordinary attributes, configuration attributes have a type, they have a value, and you can't see it here in the screenshot, but also they have a description field that, for all the usual reasons, you should be filling out. So now that we know a bit about the terminology and we know that configurations allow us to have a common repository of attribute values, let's continue onwards here and look at a few use cases. Now, this is just 3 use cases. You can find lots more reasons to use configurations, but imagine, if you will, you are creating a workflow. Now, ultimately, you want this workflow to automate things in your production environment, but of course, you're not going to develop and test the workflow in your production environment. Instead, you want to first create the workflow in your test dev environment, and then later on promote the workflow into your production environment. Configurations are going to help us there. In fact, I'll show you how here shortly, because all the examples I'm going to be giving in this video and the following videos are all based on that first use case. But as you can see, there are other use cases. For instance, if you're moving workflows between different clusters, or if you have site-specific information in a workflow, or perhaps even customer-specific information in a workflow. For these reasons and lots of others, these configurations come in real handy. What else will also come in real handy here is this next diagram that I'm showing, which has nothing to do with configurations per se, but rather this is just a diagram that I'm including to help set up a scenario that we're going to walk through. So as I just said on the previous slide, in the first bullet, imagine you're creating an Orchestrator workflow. And ultimately, our goal is for that Orchestrator workflow to run in our production environment. But first, we're going to develop the Orchestrator workflow in our test dev environment. And in this particular hypothetical customer network, the test dev network consists of IP addresses that all begin 192.168.whatever.whatever. On the other hand, the production environment in our hypothetical network here has, in fact, a completely different IP address range, completely different network range. So 172.16.whatever.whatever is the IP address range, or the network address for machines and other such hosts in our production environment. So again, with these in mind, let's take a look at our first example. As you can see, I'm in the vRO client, and I'm looking at a workflow that I've created here called a painfully bad example. And I called it that because I want to make abundantly clear right from the get-go that this workflow is an example of why you need configuration elements at times. This particular example is not using configuration elements, and I'm intentionally doing that so that I can show you the types of problems that you can run into or if you do not use configurations. So no configuration elements or attributes or anything of that sort in this example. So in this example here, it looks like the first thing our workflow is going to do according to the schema is it's going to log various IP addresses. Let's see what they are. So if we click that schema element down below, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. It looks like we want to log the IP address of our web server. So that'd be 172.16.1.1 and our mail server and our SSH server. And you'll notice that the network addresses that you see in these IP addresses are the test dev network. So we can do that. We can hard code IP addresses that are appropriate for the test dev network to our workflow. And not just in this schema, but maybe we do another schema elements. For instance, this one here that pretends to send an email has got the IP address for our mail server hard coded. And similarly, this next schema element, which is pretending to SSH to some machine, has a hard coded IP address. Now the problem with this particular approach here is all that hard coding of information. That information that's hard coded into our workflow is going to work fine as long as I'm running this workflow in the in the test dev environment. But when I want to promote this workflow into our production environment, I'm going to have to go back and figure out which schema elements, in this case all of them, but in which schema elements have I hard-coded test dev IP addresses. Now in this particular example, each scriptable task, there's not that many, and each scriptable task is very, very short. But if you imagine a workflow that has not 3 schema elements, but 30 or more schema elements, going in and finding all the places where you hard-coded test dev IP addresses is not going to be fun. So with this example here, you can start to get a feel for why hard-coding values into your workflow is something that we, not always, but is something that we at times will be very smart to do. So again, this is our first example of why to use configuration elements. We haven't used them just yet, but I promise we will in a few videos. In the meantime though, queue up the next video, because in the next video I'll show you another way where we get into this type of problem. And again, later on I'll show you how configurations helps us to handle those situations. So I'll see you in the next video.